I just noticed.
Good evening and welcome to the St. Maximus Society. We are going to do a follow-up video to our Psychology Part 2. We are very, very excited. That class had almost 10,000 views. So if you haven't done so yet, please like this stream. Share it with people that are interested. Fathers, welcome back, Father Nathan, first of all. Happy feast day. We miss you, yes. We're going to do a deeper dive. Father Deacon, we're going to rely on you a lot to talk about what is it that people experience when they go into therapy. We're going to do a deeper dive on Carl Jung. We're going to even talk about Jordan Peterson. We're going to talk about whether Orthodox Christians should go to secular therapy or whether they should find, a spiritual father or a priest that is more in tune with their values. Let's do a deep dive. Father Maximus, I want to start with you. You mentioned last class that one of the problems with the paradigm of the West's view of human nature is that they don't understand what it means to be a human being. Can you expound on that just for a second? And that will kind of launch us into this class, I think.
Right. I think that this is, since the last class, I looked at all the comments we had, and there was some very, very interesting comments, and there was some criticisms of some of the things I said about Jung. I gave a very, very sort of thumbnail dismissal of it, which I read some stuff between now and then, and I realized that dismissal was pretty correct. The problem is in the West they don't understand who a human being is because they don't understand that the soul has nous. It has a part that is superior to reason.
Okay.
And even though we say in the church logical sheep and rational sheep, we understand that the nous, when it is purified, has the ability to have direct knowledge of God. This is how the prophets saw things. This is how the ascetics saw things. They saw it through their purified nous. Right? We had one comment that says, no, nous is just mind. Well, that's like, the problem is it is just mind, but our minds in the fallen state are very seriously damaged. Right? So the problem with the West primarily is they theoretically, Thomas Aquinas acknowledges this, and the West under the understanding of intellectus, but there is no effort whatsoever to integrate it into their spiritual understanding. So, to make a long story short, if that's possible at this point, you can't heal somebody if you don't know what they are, right? And so if you're imagining you have a cat and you say, well, I don't believe it has a tail, and its tail gets sick, well then it's going to... So the same thing, inverted, is you can't heal man if you don't know what a healthy man looks like. And in the West, they don't know what a healthy man looks like.
Okay, very good. One of the things that we talked about last class, I want to do a quick recap, and then Father Nathan, I want to toss to you. We talked about the therapist essentially has replaced the priest in the West. We talked about there being a monetary incentive. Father Deacon brought this up for modern therapists and essentially for the pharmaceutical industry to address mental health instead of the priest and dealing with the noetic faculty of the person that needs therapy, and that the West doesn't understand what it means to be a human. Father Maximus, you just addressed the last topic. Father Nathan, what's your opinion on whether the therapist has replaced the priest in the West? I know that you hear a lot of confessions. What's your opinion about modern therapy versus the priest?
Well, there's a channel I enjoy on YouTube called Cinema Therapy, where a therapist and a filmmaker discuss films and the relationships in them. And they always introduce themselves as, I'm so-and-so, a therapist who enjoys films, and the other fellow says, well, and I'm so-and-so, a filmmaker who needs therapy. And I pertain rather to the latter category, and so we'll see how much help I can be.
Do you consider yourself a therapist oftentimes?
Absolutely not.
No, okay.
Absolutely not. And I think that's a trap that some priests do fall into, is considering themselves qualified to be Let me qualify that. I don't consider myself as a clinical therapist.
Sure. Right.
And I think that's a trap that priests can fall into, that you touched on in the last episode, that they can fall into thinking themselves qualified to treat people clinically.
Right.
When they ought to be referring them to a specialist.
How does a priest know that, though? You know, we mentioned that there is a fine line between what Father Maximus said about a healing of the soul and a separation of the soul and, you know, the mind or the body and the spirit. How does a priest really know what is in the realm of their job?
Well, Father Maximus very aptly touched on how it's important to understand what you're treating in order to treat it. And the same goes for this question. The priest needs to understand what clinical therapy is in order to differentiate it from his role as the spiritual father.
Okay.
Of course, it's ideal, as you said in the last talk, if the priest has a little bit of experience in that area, has had some training or some background in therapy.
I watched a long 3-hour video, which is not my kind of thing, on Carl Jung specifically, and I understand the attractiveness of it because he's a very bright man, and he has he's very skilled at defining all these types of psychological phenomena. Mm-hmm. Right, and when you listen, it's like, well, that makes sense. That, you know, inner child and all the language we use, you know, complexes. The only problem is he doesn't have the capacity to heal. He's a good diagnostician in the sense of seeing what's wrong with man. You know, Aesop's fables will tell you what's wrong with man. You don't need to have a reassuring German PhD in order to make that. But his conclusions on how to fix things, how to solve things, are completely wrong. So I think maybe there is a possibility that we can use some of this therapeutic language, but we cannot use their ultimate understanding, because again, if you're trying to heal, you know, a rabbit versus, you know, a wolf, they're different things. So you can't simply just say, well, we're going to take this worldly understanding and apply it to somebody. Man is made for divinity. He's built for a different purpose.
And this, if I may jump in, this is something that I think, observe in various areas of literature. I felt that way about Anton Chekhov, that he was very good at pointing out problems, but he was also very good at pointedly ignoring the solution.
Right. Well, you know,
which was the church.
Anyone who's lived on Earth for more than a few minutes, it's very easy to find out the problems. It's very easy to come up with, you know...
You'll probably experience them.
Guess what? We all have mothers and fathers, and they're imperfect people, so of course we have issues with our mothers and our fathers. We all grow up, and we deal with various traumas. Either we deal with them well, or we deal with them poorly, right? But so it doesn't take a magician to put all this stuff together into some sort of coherent understanding, but I can see how people are attracted to it, because it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I had this, I had that, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of a con man and cold reading. You know, that's a separate thing. Do we have the? Let's
Father Deacon, I want
the therapist has to
exactly.
say.
Yeah,
I'm enjoying it.
He wants to hear what you all have to say before he jumps in. You had a lot of stories. When we were talking, the chat was really kind of blowing up with stories about, you know, people in therapy that were in the chat, their families. Almost 100% of the people had a very bad experience from therapy, or they've had family members that have really, really had a bad experience through therapy. I would like you actually to take us through the different types of therapy, because you've done your research for the class. Thank you so much. Congratulations. What are some of the different types of therapy that people are undergoing? What are the different types of strategies for therapists, for counselors, for psychologists, for psychiatrists, other than medication? And how is that so different than what people are experiencing in the church?
Yeah, so great question. I'm glad there was a lot of honesty in the chat.
Yeah, they hate therapy.
That's fine, yeah.
I'm not a big fan myself, so I'm going to play a big skeptic this episode again.
That's good. Okay. And I think it's that level of skepticism and lack of perhaps willing to be open, which either makes people go to therapy or not for different reasons. So when we talk about psychology, we're talking about this science of understanding behavior and the mind. And as we see, it comes in a lot of flavors. And a lot of these flavors are something that's, theoretical. And there's a bunch of theories out there, as you've seen. Jungian approaches, Freudian approaches. There are even wilder approaches. But the fact of the matter remains that the theory has to be tied to a practice. So we, as Orthodox Christians, we have a actual tangible practice to our beliefs, how we worship. So the idea with psychology, and specifically this branch called counseling, is where we see this manifestation of what the psychological, but more the philosophical underpinnings are of a lot of these theories that are put into practice.
I don't want you to get distracted, but what you just mentioned is really important because the paradigm of the West differs so much from the East. A lot of these, and I mean Eastern Orthodoxy, a lot of the therapists, modern psychiatrists are coming from the vantage point and belief system of atheism, right? Evolutionary theory, even postmodern understanding of the world. Doesn't that in and of itself, like you said, lend itself to a bad outcome if they don't have the truth?
Oh, for sure. And
okay.
you can see that the center of the, when we talk about counseling specifically, we're talking with the subject, right? And the subject is the focus, right? And they're the source of truth. Now, when we look at orthodoxy, we have a different source of truth.
Right,
We have Christ.
You have your truth. What's your truth? That's a modern saying.
Right.
Tell me your truth.
This subjectivity of truth.
Right.
Now, there's a difference between you are the one experiencing something and you're the best person to know what's actually happened to you as a reporter, sure. But to identify one's passions and then befriend them, as Jung has done and kind of instructs, is much different than the fighting of the passion, something that we're trying to actually get rid of so that we are, maybe not the best ones to know how to heal ourselves in all manners. So this happens the same in any type of, it can happen in a relationship with a spiritual father and a spiritual child, where the spiritual child is not as well informed of the spiritual life as perhaps the spiritual father. Now, the same type of relationship is found in counseling, and in that sense, the relationship becomes one of the most important things, this cultivation of rapport and whatnot. And so what lacks, though, is the center by which change is supposed to occur, the lens, if you will. So when we have an orthodox view of therapy, we can create practices that are not married to a certain belief system and use that and adopt them into an orthodox understanding.
What's the yardstick for success, though, again, I'm going to be the skeptic. What's the yardstick for success in a Western paradigm?
Yeah, so
is it that, because a lot of the comments is, look, I went every day, a lot of people for X amount of years even, and all I did was become friends with a therapist. Like, I didn't heal my thoughts, I still had bad thoughts, I didn't feel better, right? Which is,
And I would say that's it's really bad therapy, and it's clear that a lot of people have gone through really bad therapy.
It can happen with a priest too.
It can happen with the spiritual life. How many people have been to some really bad denominations or versions, I guess, of
they've been. A lot of people say, I don't go to church anymore because I've been burned by the church.
Let me interrupt to sort of try to create some.
You're not
sense.
interrupting at all, Father.
When we say therapy, I think the problem is this can mean a whole host of things, different things to different people. You defined it in its proper sort of clinical way, but I think a lot of times people are using therapy in a way that is much more general, and so if we actually examine the word itself, I mean, there's a very well-known book, Orthodox Psychotherapy by Metropolitan Herosius. So what we do as priests is a kind of therapy. It is therapeutic. The first name that they gave to monks, St. Dionysius the Areopagite, he names monks, he calls them therapeutae, which means those undergoing therapy. So I think we have to make a very definite distinction between Orthodox therapy within the church with an Orthodox psychotherapist or someone like that, and then the many other myriad of kinds of therapies that are out there. Is that a fair? I just wanted to.
Yeah, that's a fair point to make. And in Father Hierotheos Vlachos's writings, he talks about that the church is a spiritual hospital, and the method by which the nous is purified, illumined, and deified is the true psychotherapy. We see that therapy is this vehicle by which a person comes to the knowledge of one's self. But there are myriads of different ways of how that comes about, and some not really too well. We talked about how there have been some bad therapies in general. In modern New Age psychology, you can't really divorce a lot of these things from the belief system or the philosophy that they're derived from. And so you're not going to get a lot of success with them.
So you shouldn't pay for it then.
Ideally, one shouldn't. And the beauty of this thing is that it's supposed to be free, right? It's supposed to be a way really for another person to, if you want to use colloquial terms, kind of show up for the other person. So that also is pretty broad. It's important to note that just like there are many different types of therapies, there's even more different types of therapists. And you can have bad therapists, for sure. And you mentioning the chat of the person who just ultimately becomes just friends with their therapist and isn't going. The goal of therapy is really goal setting, right? So we're trying to achieve something, and the method by which that goal is achieved can be various. And so you have different approaches to this. You have different types of therapeutic approaches, and you have different practitioners with their own belief systems that are interpreting what they're understanding and then trying to create their own methodology. So it can really be the wild, wild west of poor best practices.
Father Nathan, I want to go back to the concept of the therapist replacing the priest. If, as Father Maximus says and the Holy Fathers say, that the goal is really the purification of our nous, is it possible that there's a danger for Christians, specifically Orthodox Christians, going to secular therapy, listening to secular psychologists that have a Jungian background, maybe like a Jordan Peterson? Is that problematic for the spiritual life?
It's not only possible, I'd say it's practically guaranteed.
Okay.
My graduating class just met for our 20th anniversary, 20th reunion in Jordanville, New York. And in the process, we had tea with Bishop Luke of Holy Trinity Monastery. And had a wonderful conversation with him in which we discussed this very matter. And he emphasized the need for, if you're going to consult a therapist, it should absolutely be an Orthodox therapist. I'm sure we'll touch on Peterson later, but anybody who is well aware of Orthodoxy and rejects it is automatically suspect in my books.
Oh, but he's going to convert. They keep saying he's going to convert.
They do keep saying that. They've been saying it for how many years?
10 years at least.
So maybe it still happened.
We pray.
I mean, he doesn't even identify himself as a Christian, though, right? Isn't that problematic?
I know he has a affection for Orthodoxy, But that's the difference between driving and walking. I mean, you can like cars, but you have to drive a car to be a driver.
Right.
So we should pray for it. But the problem is that the Jungian cosmology is so appealing because it's so adaptable. You can make it say anything you want, but ultimately, like in that book Cosmos and Transcendence by Wolfgang Smith,
Right.
they ultimately, the unconscious, the collective unconscious, ultimately replaces God.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
And that the agents of this collective unconscious act as effectively individuals that you're supposed to interact with. And we talked about, and I was listening to that video when it got to and I know we're going to get there, when it got to shadow work, that you
Right.
embrace these shadows. And
Yeah.
stuff. I mean,
I've done my research on shadow work. We'll go into that next.
They're so obviously, that's nothing Christian about that.
No.
They might be demons, but they at the very least they're not. I mean, it's what good and evil don't go together. You know, the good repels evil, and so the idea that we have to sort of like come to grips with our evil side and sort of embrace it, it's crazy.
And yet this is exactly the boundary that's the secular world is constantly looking to erase. It's interesting. It's
very interesting.
It's seductive, this idea that there's always a flip side to evil. And so we get the backstories of Maleficent and
Right.
of Cruella de Vil.
Well, not
she was
really
kind of
evil.
nasty, but-
See, they're like damaged.
exactly.
Now you can understand
We
them
should
now.
probably do a class on some point. Is why is evil attractive?
Well, let's
Because
actually
it is, obviously. We pretend like it's not, but it is.
Let's go into Jung, because I would say that we live in definitely like a postmodern, deconstructive world right now, right? Father Deacon, you mentioned that, there's my truth, it's subjective truth, it becomes your truth, which is essentially the truth because you're the only one seeing it. But we live in a world where Joseph Campbell's heroes, we live in a world where Jordan Peterson is doing 6-hour lectures on the book of Genesis, but not actually talking about anything. The snake could be a demon, or it could be just a thought, or like a primordial. There's so
guys
many
are
things
also-
it could be.
They're also ripping off the perennialists. They're ripping off Rene Guénon, who did a lot
Right.
of work on this subject, who would find what they did with it morally abhorrent.
It seems like, Father, in the West that there's no truth. Let me talk about like Jungian shadow work, and I just want to get your input, on this. One of the biggest things is focusing on karma and past memories. As Father mentioned, it's the unconscious self that you need to focus on. And there is a collective unconscious which affects us all. A lot of this is intergenerational, right? The first thing I notice, and correct me, if I'm wrong, is that this is essentially like a kind of a perverse way of saying, we're fallen, right? So, we have trauma, but they don't trace it back to its original roots, as in, we were in paradise, and now, as the scripture says, the ground is cursed for our sake because we messed up.
The roots, they would say the roots are definitely, Jung following Freud, it's definitely part of the evolutionary process.
Right.
So if you're not an evolutionist, you can't buy into this stuff at all. Because their notion is when the first man, this is from Freud, but Jung follows it, the first killing, right? Then they sort of became aware in sort of this mystical moment that what they were. And so from that point, there is this understanding of this is how man sort of became aware.
Right.
And so consequently, all this unconsciousness comes from that first act.
There are, I'm just going
Good
over
myth.
shadow work now. So past memories, we need to focus on the past memories. There's an unconscious self, we need to get in touch with that. We need to examine ancestral lineage and past trauma. This is therapy 101. Like, what trauma do you have in the past? The last class, we juxtapose that with, when you go to confession, you're talking about your sins, because those are the things you're in control over. In, like Jungian psychology work, you're talking about past trauma. How do you feel about things? So Jung essentially is saying that society is imposing norms that we internalize, and we must question societal norms to break free of cultural karma. What's your opinion on that?
I mean, cultural karma is a problematic term to begin with.
I mean, there are certain norms in society that it's good if we follow those norms, right? If we question everything, then it's a free fall, right?
Yeah,
Free fall.
this understanding that chaos will eventually lead to order when you kind of tame and integrate it.
Yeah, that's exactly the shadow work. Yeah.
So, we mentioned Peterson, and for all the JBP fans or not fans, his work is, can be almost broken down into moralism. Everything is a moral play. He emphasizes telling the truth, right? Having structure, having rigidity in your own positive traits.
And these are good.
And these are all things. And this is all
Make
stuff.
your bed. That's good advice. Make your bed.
Do we
So-
have to go to him for this?
Right, and so that's the thing, is that when he came really on the scene, he comes on the scene because of language.
Right.
This issue of pronouns and the university controlling what he can and cannot say. And as an avid Solzhenitsyn fan, he's not trying to kind of recreate this Soviet wheel of dissenting opinion. And so he starts to kind of just speak out, and what it leads to is knowing that, yeah, he's saying this stuff and it's good, but that's nothing new. Nothing that he's saying is has not been said before. And this claim to fame, I think, really lies, and the lectures that he does are in this Jungian expansion of narrative, really, within the text. So when we see the archetypes that Jung was so, bent on having everyone understand, that are replicated throughout, it kind of takes it a step further from just, this is a narrative, this is a way we might interpret reality, to this is how we should live our life.
Yeah. One of the things that caught me, especially after years of reading the Holy Fathers now, is this, desire of the school of Jung, if you will, to really kind of invite the imagination in as a form of meditation, and to not judge our thoughts. Father Nathan, on the sheet right there in front of you, I have quotes from the Holy Fathers. I want to read what Jung says, and then if you want to go on the opposite side of what the Holy Fathers say, any of those quotes I think are applicable. So we must invite the shadows into our lives. We have to explore the unconscious to break free of past trauma and blaze our own path. We must embrace a journey of self-discovery in this way, and we should not judge. We should focus on the images that come to us and not judge the images, but incorporate them into our being. What would the Fathers say about that?
Well,
I don't like that.
Saint Isaac the Syrian responds that if a man does not argue with the thoughts that the enemy secretly sows in us, but by prayer to God uproots conversation with them, not agrees with them passively,
Right.
This is a sign that his mind has attained wisdom and that he has found a short path.
Exactly. So Jung would then say, but Father, the shadow represents unmet needs of the self. We must embrace imperfection and resolve the shadow.
Yeah. St. Mark the Ascetic replies that a man who's enticed by sinful thoughts is blinded by them. And he sees the action of sin in himself, but he cannot see the cause of this action.
Right. Jung says that we must eventually incorporate the shadow by focusing on vivid images, focusing on the stages of internal alchemy, dissolution, purification, and coagulation, and that we must cultivate an openness to the message and symbols as we manifest the unconscious and incorporate the shadow into ourselves.
An open mind can be as dangerous as an open door, and St. Silouan the Athonite says, it's impossible to keep spiritual peace if we do not take care of the mind, keeping the door shut.
Right.
That is, if we do not drive out thoughts that are displeasing to God, and on the contrary, keep thoughts which are pleasing to God. It is necessary to look into the heart with mind and see what is done there. Is it peaceful or not? And if not, then find out in what you have sinned.
So, according to Jung, there is no good or bad emotions, therefore we must not judge them and have radical acceptance of them. Therefore, we are now cultivating an inner observer consciousness, which I think that is actually important, to be mindful of your thoughts, right? But not necessarily accept all of them. and be able to entertain these thoughts without accepting them as a form of detachment. So there he's actually saying, well, we need to be open to them and not judge them, but not necessarily accept them. So he's opening the door up, and then he's giving a word of caution, like, yeah, but maybe some of them are bad. Father, what would you say to this?
The essential problem here is he both simultaneously treats the collective unconscious as something that's real and not real.
Right.
Right. The fact of the matter is that there are demons. We are not alone in the universe. There are evil spirits. And, of course, in his evolutionist, materialist universe, they don't exist. So these dark thoughts that come to you could only come from other human beings. So consequently, how bad could they be? So this process of sort of embracing and dealing with these dark thoughts, from his perspective, makes perfect sense. If you don't believe in God, and if you don't believe in the devil, well, then it's all, like Father said, it's just all very interesting. The issue, I think, that's Jung could be easily dismissed, except for the fact that he was a brilliant scholar, and he looked in every culture, right? And he saw there are remarkably similar archetypes and things in all the different cultures, right?
Right.
And his way of explaining that is that these are like shards and parts of our evolutionary process, okay? Well, that saves the appearances in the sense of, like, okay, most people are evolutionists now, so that makes perfect sense. Every generation, every group has what they call an objectual mediation. They have a way of sort of making their culture work, right? And it's myth. It's based on generally accepted lies, right? No one really goes too deep into them, but they generally accept them. So then the question is, what happened in the supposedly Christian West that a guy comes up and says, there's no real God except just broken shards of evolution. There's no real devil except the same thing. And after watching that video and reading a few books, his thinking, Jungian thinking, is the dominant worldview today.
Yeah, I would say so.
We are a tiny minority. Even within Orthodoxy, we're a small minority, because there's a tremendous attraction to this kind of thinking, even in Orthodoxy. And I would say part of that is we have failed to communicate aspects of Orthodoxy that address those supposed needs. Okay, it's not all about squelching our imagination, it's about transforming our imagination. It is not about and one of the good examples of this in the 20th century was St. Nikolai Velimirovich and his prayers by the lake. He was able to use his spiritual power and his imagination that had been transformed by the ascetic labors to see symbols as they were. And I've said many times in this broadcast, one of the things that struck me when I became Orthodox, is St. Maximus particularly, but other saints, are constantly saying that the theoria of the logos, which we translate as the contemplation of the inner essence of things, is not something that's secondary. It's part of the spiritual process. But since the Orthodoxy, particularly in the Western world, has completely, for the most part, ignored that, it's reduced this cosmic religion that has an answer for everything to essentially, in many cases, just sort of piety. Read Lives of Saints, read the Bible, and don't worry about anything else. So what do people do? They go and they look to Jung and Peterson, because they are trafficking in our stuff. Saint Gregory Palamas and Saint Basil says, we should go and take the wisdom of the Egyptians. He calls the spoils of the Egyptians, and we crush them and use them for ourselves. And that's what they've done.
Baptize them.
And we have failed to do that. So I think we need to be more bold in, and this is why particularly Jung, but Peterson as well, this is why it drives me nuts, because these things do have there is an objective symbolism about a snake. It's not just something you make up. It's not just a pile of shards from evolution. It's a real thing. And that insofar as we purify our nous and do those things, we can derive great spiritual benefit from it.
Father Deacon, it seems to me that one of the biggest problems in any type of modern psychology, postmodern psychology, deconstructionism, and certainly, psychotherapy, is there is a focus on the self rather than Christ. Holy Scripture points to Christ. The fathers are saying focus on Christ. Father Nathan just read that we need to guard our thoughts, and focus not on us, but on Christ. Would you agree with that? And when is there a time to, I know that you mentioned earlier that the subject is the focus. Isn't that problematic, or is that not problematic? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it is. And Jungian therapy, if you can call it therapy, it's because it's more of a psychoanalysis, right?
Sure.
You're taking parts of what you believe to be your unconscious and kind of ripping them apart. In this, purification that doesn't exist, the coagulation that he talks about, the stages of this cosmology this alchemy, you can see that there is this lack of, doing something about it that's going to help you get out of it. It's really, you have to integrate all these different things. And for a lot of times, people that are trying to get help for an issue, this is going to be beyond the ability of the therapist, and certainly might not be the intention of the subject. But when we're talking about psychology, we're talking about, a series of tests, of assessments that are made to analyze usually behavior, state of mind. And this is just interpretation of data, right? And the subject is the one giving the data points. But
you're talking about like ink blots and stuff? Or like when I say mother, what comes to your mind?
Right.
What exactly, just so our viewers can get a feel?
So that's more of that psychoanalysis,
okay,
right? It's even more so it's the latter part that you mentioned, not even the subconscious, these ink blots, right? But it's, word association.
Right.
I say this, what comes to your mind? That's much more in line with less Freudian, Jungian psychoanalysis.
Sure.
And then it's just ripping apart your unconscious until you're really in an oblivion.
That seems like, I went to University of California. I majored in deconstructionism. Mm-hmm. Nothing is what it is. Everything is broken down. Like you said, it's just all shards.
A symbol is a symbol. That's
right,
it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have meaning, but we know that it does.
Well, I read somewhere, that's what a valuable thing that is. Freud admits, he says, this is not science. This is not science in any kind of real way. He said the people who understand me understand what we're doing is something else. And obviously the same thing with Jung. He speaks in a very reassuring German accent, but this is not science. This is magic. This is precisely magic. I mean, there's no other. And the thing is, we have to be careful. Just to say because it's magic doesn't mean it doesn't work. It's just if it's not rooted in God, it's rooted in the human will.
They all mention essentially, fathers, alchemy, right? Which is it's the transmutation of something into something else. Which we know we can do that with metals. We're supposed to do that with our noose. There's nothing inherently evil or wicked about alchemy, except that it seems that the focus here is not on Christ. So what are we supposed to transform into if it's not little g gods?
Well, again, this is one of the things that irritates me a great deal because
just one
alchemy. Yes, we'll just rename this Father Maximus's rants. Alchemical language is perfectly permissible. The fathers use it. They don't use that term, but it's essentially the application of energy to transform the lead into gold. Spiritual lead, which is fallen and gross, and through the active energy and the focusing of the will, it becomes gold. They understood it as symbolic.
Or coal into a diamond through great pressure.
Right. And so
they
would many times in pre-Christian cultures, they would do these things for practicality, but also they would do it as a kind of like work, like a sort of semi-sacrament in the sense of prior to Christianity. But the use of alchemical language or that principle is they usurped it because what it is, the goal, the philosopher's stone is Christ. And many of the alchemists who wrote in ancient times that were in Christian periods of times would say precisely that. The end result is Christ. But they've completely eliminated that.
Father Deacon, if you wouldn't mind reading the super chat. Thank you so much for the super chat. It's a pretty big one right here from who's it from?
It's from Ephesians 7:17.
All right.
So recently I considered therapy, but I already go to the church and read the fathers, and I feel like I'm recognizing my so-called trauma from parents and past. I truly see how the church is the hospital of the soul. That's great to hear. I think that's the best thing I've read in the chat.
There you go.
In a while.
So for those that are considering therapy, what advice would you give those folks out there? Because there's a lot of people that are listening to us that are either in therapy, they're considering therapy. Many of the people out there had family members in therapy. So how should we relate to that situation?
Yeah, so as I kind of continue to say, there's a difference between therapy and this psychoanalysis.
Right.
Just like there's a difference between psychiatry and psychology.
Sure.
So with therapy, we're really trying to solve a particular problem, achieve a goal. And there are different modalities to this, as we'll hopefully get into. The thing is, though, that we are seeing the distinction is that there is a center, there's Christ, right? There is different approaches to how one can understand this. There's also different approaches to how one understands yourself. And so the big thing is the therapist that you're going to choose. There's a lot of them. Everyone and their mother's a therapist today.
There's online therapists.
And their laptop is a therapist.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, most people's therapist is ChatGPT at this point. And what you kind of get is more of the same as this echo chamber, right? You're going to find a lot of bad therapists, maybe unqualified people, but there are a lot of people that are qualified. And you can find them, and you can make sure that they're Orthodox Christians. For example, if you are Muslim, wouldn't you want your friend to perhaps also know about Islam, to be able to maybe understand some points about Islam? Not necessarily. It's not always important, but there is this type of understanding when you do. You can go to a therapist, some random therapist, and say, I'm having problems at home, at work, at church. They'll be like, oh, well, you probably have to, drop your wife, quit your job, and leave the church, and then we can talk, right?
Right.
And then your problems will go away, and maybe you'll have a whole different set of problems, and probably a different insurance policy. And so you're kind of limited with what you're going to be able to achieve there. Now you can pick an Orthodox therapist. There's a bunch of resources out there. OCAMPR, the Orthodox Christian Association for Medical Professionals.
Oh, wow.
That exists. It's a whole directory of people by state for specific problems that you're looking into. Maybe you have an eating disorder, or maybe you have religious trauma from wherever you came from. Maybe you have a whole OCD complex. You have some other complex. You have some other words and letters that people have assigned to your name and to your personhood that you now have to seek help in. But there's directories for this. You can go on Psychology Today. You can find any therapist. You can see what they are able to do, what they're qualified in, and do some research.
Psychology Today won't tell you whether or not they're an Orthodox Christian. Correct?
Father Nathan,
They might tell you if they're a Christian, and some people might say that they're I'm an Orthodox Christian.
I want to ask a question.
Yeah.
Is there not a danger, even in a well-meaning Orthodox therapist, for the fact that if they are not, they could be Orthodox Christian, they could be pious, but that does not in any way necessarily mean they have an understanding of the philokalia and the spiritual life.
Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of laymen are sort of still in the oblivious state. So is it not a danger that the fact that an Orthodox therapist could lead you to believe that you're receiving Orthodox therapy when you're just receiving therapy from somebody that's Orthodox?
Yeah, think of it like this. When you're going to address your physical health, you might have a doctor, like a main doctor you go to. You might have different specialists that you might also be seeing. You might have a team of doctors that are kind of looking after your health. The same thing, even more so, you have to kind of be vigilant about your spiritual health, your psychological health. So none of these things should be done without consulting with your spiritual father, consulting with members of your family. If you have healthy relationships with them, there are things shouldn't be done in isolation. in a silo, and especially when it's something considering spiritual matters. This is not the realm in which a therapist operates. They're not a spiritual advisor, or rather, they shouldn't be.
Right. Father Nathan, the word like psych is mind and ology is like study of or a word about. But again, as a skeptic, not just on psychology and therapy itself, but even a lot of popular medicinal advice, right? Doesn't the mind lie to us? That's right. Should we trust our thoughts? You know, when people are going to confession, I'm sure a lot of it is the thoughts they're having, sinful thoughts, and maybe they're acting on it or not. But should we really trust our thoughts? It seems to be in the modern West that we're giving so much credence to the thoughts that we produce, but we are not our thoughts.
We know that we are fallen human beings. A fall
Right.
took place, our nature has been damaged, and our work as Orthodox Christians is to achieve transformation, theosis, through Jesus Christ who saves us. And so, as such, of course, we can't trust our thoughts. They say, trust your heart. No, don't trust your heart. It's the last thing you should trust. So, do you trust your car? Well, no, frankly. There can be all kinds of things going on inside your car that there's no way you can know all of them. So, no, you don't trust your car. On the contrary, you keep a very close eye on it. You're attuned to its every unhealthy whistle or mutter, and when you see anything wrong with it, you don't hopefully turn up the radio louder so that you can't hear it sputtering. You say there's something wrong with the car, and you go to a specialist. You try to deal with it, and the same thing with our nature. We seek we don't. There is no infallible internal compass. We do have the conscience, which is the voice of God within us, the voice of God as a law in our hearts. This we have, and to this we can listen. But this is not our heart itself. It is the voice of God within the heart.
Father Maximus, what should the Orthodox Church, in your opinion, do in response to the threats that we're facing from academia, postmodernism, deconstructionism, and the crisis of mental health in the West? It's paradoxical in a way because we have more study on psychology than ever, more mental health. We have more medication being prescribed than ever for stress and anxiety, more mental health issues, right? More mental health crises. It doesn't seem to be working. And we've already said that a lot of this is unfortunately a failure of the church. It's a failure of us Christians to do what we were supposed to do, to go out in the highways and hedges and, like preach Christ as the fathers say in an Orthodox manner. What's the response of the church? Let's talk about that for a minute.
I think, and we can narrow it to Orthodoxy in America because that's what we have some familiarity with. I think the fact that the early generations of Orthodox immigrants were so interested in becoming accepted that they wanted, academic credentials, and many of them particularly thought that psychotherapy and psychology, whatever, were something that was very good for them, and so that generation sort of passed those ideas on to the next generation. There was a lot of influence from the Roman Catholics. This is one of the reasons why ecumenism is so dangerous, is because the more you deal with them, the more that worldly notion of being worldly and just sort of accepting the world. There's a document from Vatican II.
For those that don't know, what is ecumenism? What is perennialism? What is ecumenism?
Ecumenism is essentially saying, we can narrow it to Orthodox, within Christianity, is that essentially all Christian bodies, for the most part, are the same. They have some slightly different perspective, but ultimately they would say that theology doesn't really matter. Right? And I guess you can have variations of that where they say, well, as long as you're Trinitarian, okay, and then, but then if you get to the point where it's like, if Trinitarianism matters, then theology matters, right? So that's ecumenism, and then perennialism is very well entrenched,
Perennialism is a little bit more is a more sophisticated form of theosophy, and it essentially says that every sort of race of people has a providential manifestation of God, right? So the Hindus, for the Indian people, Islam, there are
many paths to God.
There are many paths to God, and that ultimately the Fritjof Schuon, who wrote started it rolling, wrote a book called The Transcendent Unity of Religions, and his point was when you get to the top of the mountain, it's all the same. And I think you can see that in a lot of liberal Orthodox thinking. What the Patriarch Bartholomew was saying about creating a safe, sacred space for all religions. I mean, I've never seen that in the gospel. I mean, when St. Paul encountered on Mars Hill, he didn't say, well, let's have a dialogue. He said, the unknown God I now proclaim to you openly. So whatever sort of mediations that you had in the past, ultimately you have to turn to Christ. Not say like, well, no, we'll just keep that idol there. We'll talk about this. So I think that those, in a very simple way, that we probably should do a class on those things too. There is a difference, sort of, I think we can look at different traditions, and we can see the broken remnants of the primordial tradition, the pre-flood tradition, right? So when Noah's sons went throughout the world, they had something. And I think the character of Melchizedek in the Old Testament represents somebody who had this connection. But Christianity is not just restoring the primordial religion. It is restoring the base so that we can move to deification. Because nothing in those ancient understandings led to that. And I think, this whole argument, and we're jumping the shark right now for those of you at home. One of the issues here, and what these people believe, essentially like Plotinus, they believe that the nous of God is undescended. So they believe all you have to do is just sort of clear away some of the false thinking, and then you're God. That's their thinking. Whereas we believe, obviously, it's more than that. There has to be someone coming down from above to transform us. But if you look at how Plotinus talks about things and how Jung talks about things, it's remarkably similar.
St. Paul writes in Colossians 3:1-3, if ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God the Father. Set your affection on things above, not on things of the earth, for ye are dead, and your life is hid with Christ God. Along those lines of dying to the past, Father Deacon, how is it helpful for Christians to focus on past memories, to focus on past sins, and to focus on past trauma?
Despondency, I hear, is not a good thing.
Right.
And I would say that it's usually not helpful because it doesn't do anything. Nothing happens. Just kind of a re-traumatization, if you will, of your past, which doesn't exist anymore.
Right. It's gone.
However, the effects of the past usually do play in not only the present moment, but will continue to play out in the future.
Father, I've heard it, if I may, Father, I've heard it said that trauma is not so much what happened, but how you react to it. Is that accurate?
It's, I would
Unless
say,
you get hit with a baseball bat, then it's actual trauma. No.
I would say how it shows up in your life today.
Okay.
I think we can agree with this, that sometimes there are things that happened, particularly in your youth, that as a way of surviving you covered up and you don't know about it. You don't want to think about it, and being aware of those things sometimes can be helpful, but you cannot dwell on those things. I mean, when your mind is going towards despondency, the church has a very clear direction what we should do. We pick up the prayer open, we pray. We don't dwell on that because, like you said, it's not doing anything. It doesn't makes you sad and miserable and re-victimizes you.
Yeah, so for all of those who have been to therapy, and all you do is kind of talk about your past traumas, and it's just this loop of talking, and it goes nowhere, and then you're surprised that nothing's happening. Don't be despondent. It's not you. The idea is that trauma affects us whether we are aware of it or not. You can see it in a brain scan. You can take a scan of somebody's brain and look at these different parts of the brain that are not firing as much.
Right, yeah.
And so this is a physiological response, right? It's a manifestation of this trauma in your body. And the way to fix these things is usually by doing something, not by talking about them.
So emotion comes from motion. We got to do.
Well, yeah, and feelings, they might be real to you.
Always trust your feelings.
Right.
Feelings are so important.
They might be real, feel real, but they're not factual sometimes.
Okay.
And with a lot of the therapy that I'm sure a lot of people have gone to, they haven't received much. The goal of a lot of therapy, modern psychotherapy, that is to give you resources and tools how to deal with whatever it is that you're dealing with. And for the most part, a lot of therapeutic approaches are short-term. They're not intended to be long-term. The longer-term ones, I mean, we're already dealing with a pathology. We're dealing with something that has to be maintained, almost like an illness that just won't go away. So it's very different, and we have to understand that these are different things. But there are also a vast, multitude of these different approaches.
Would it be helpful to perhaps, Father, elucidate these three categories? It seems
Right.
like very helpful clarification.
Great. Yeah. I mean, would you like to read them?
Well, the boundaries between the different
Sure.
spheres, the first being the priest and the spiritual father, guides people in repentance, hears confessions, and instructs them in prayer, the ascetical rule, and discerning the thoughts. Now, the therapist and the counselor, according to your notes, teaches skills, which is very important. It pertains to what you just said, that the real goal, the long-term goal of the therapist or counselor is to provide a skill set that will give the person the tools to actually make a difference, make a change and teach them to deal with the effects of the trauma.
Father Maximus, should a priest during confession offer some actions that people can do to go along with what the fathers are saying? Does there need to be this delineation between priest and therapist, or how would you view confession as a form of therapy, in that hopefully your confessor is giving you actions to do?
I would only say
obediences or whatever.
I would only say that therapy, as we are now defining it, has only existed for 150 years. So obviously the church prior to that, there were no secular individuals that you would send people to. The church was it, and so the spiritual father was it. Now, I think we've learned a little bit about mental health and serious mental illness. So I think, again, the therapist can be part of that.
Pardon my interrupting, Father. If we've learned so much, then how is it still so persistent? It seems to be that our increased knowledge of the problem has led to more of the problem. Or am I wrong?
You're not wrong at all. I agree 100%. The problem is there's mission drift. Why did we lose Vietnam? Because we didn't know what victory looked like there.
Right.
Right? And so what Father says about therapy, and I'm learning a lot from him, is that therapy is very specific goal-oriented. Right? It helps you sort of organize your life in some sense. You can live a well-organized life on earth and still be miserable and die and go to hell. So they're not trying they're not trying to get you out of hell.
Right.
Right? They're trying to make you adapt to a society that is intrinsically sick. So if you're absolutely running around,
right,
and you're well, this society's great, there's something wrong.
Right. If your shadow thoughts are sickness, integrating those is not necessarily the best idea.
Right.
I don't think you have to go too far into society. I think a lot of people are going to therapy because they're already in hell. They're already they've already created this hell, and there is this desire to get them out, right? And it comes from their own desire. Maybe there are some therapists that are watching, but having a client or a patient with a lot of defenses, you're not going to be doing much therapy.
So does somebody that's considering a type of therapy need to set some sort of benchmark for success before they go to a therapist? Or does that need to be worked out with the therapist? Like, in other words, I need some sort of, understanding on what success looks like.
Yeah, and I think part of this is this sort of theoretical person we're creating who's going to a therapist. I think we have to figure out, is he schizophrenic? That's one set of circumstances. Does he have something that he's doing that threatens his life? So that, the orthodox therapy is long-term. Is he a drug addict? Is he suicidal? And I think we have to sort of identify that first. And then, if he's not in those circumstances, he just feels lousy and is not happy about his life and needs that, he should discuss that with his priest first, right?
They're probably not going to go to therapy or the priest because they don't really want to.
Well, this is...
They're
so
just
that's what I'm saying. Our theoretical person, what does he want?
So the theoretical person, I believe, that goes to therapy is probably going out of this... either they're court-ordered, or there is something going on that's so chaotic in their life that they're really reaching out for help, and they don't know how to get that help. Man, they're probably maybe not even connected to a church. And I've heard of a lot of people who are maybe connected to a church, and that's the source of a lot of their issues. And so kind of going to the source of the problem isn't going to kind of get rid of the problem. But the person that's going is probably just so lost that they are willing to reach to whatever is able to pull them out, or so they think.
Fathers, let's talk about a real person, but keep it anonymous. What are some of the major, confessions that you hear, the themes that you hear, and then some of the obediences or advice that you give to parishioners as action items in order to help solve this problem? Because people want to know what can they do right now, right? So what are some big ones, and then what are some of the obediences that you're giving to parishioners that are action items to help them solve this problem?
Most of the people, in my experience, that are having serious depression, whatever, the first thing they need to do is get a prayer rule and pray and go to church, because many times the people who are going to church and praying, whatever, generally are not in this kind of bad, unless they have some sort of actual real mental illness. But for most people, it's just being aware, spiritual reading.
Yeah.
This is extremely important.
You've told me you can tell when somebody's not reading and praying.
You can tell.
As soon as they walk in the door, you
within 30
said
seconds,
this.
you can tell if somebody's reading. And this is not something that was sometimes I'll recommend a book. Read this book. Well, I read that. Okay, read it again.
Yeah.
Read it again and again and again until you get it right. So I think for people who are not, it's a different circumstance when you have somebody who's for priests, I think one of the things we deal with a lot are people with substance abuse issues. And then the issue there is sometimes they need therapy, and just because the priest doesn't have time, to sit down and talk to them for hours a day, which sometimes can be helpful. Father, you might have some opinions on that. Maybe it's just talk, but I think sometimes it's that just the act of talking can help people come to their own awareness, despite what the therapist is saying. A priest could do that, I think, but most of the times they don't have time.
So I think a good therapist is probably doing a lot more listening than they're doing talking. Because he's not there to give advice. They, whatever term you want to use. They're not there to be your guru. They are there to, as Carl Rogers would put, give you unconditional positive regard. Even though you're
totally messed up,
totally maybe suck as a person, they're going to be there and give you the same type of love or attention, or at least the willingness to listen to your BS as they would to anyone else.
Isn't it sad that role has now we have to pay somebody to do that?
Totally.
Because in the ancient world, or any time before now, it would be family members, people in the town, whatever, people in the church, who would be able to do that. And the fact that you have to pay somebody to pretend to love you, that's
so this
sad.
is an interesting point. We talk about addiction. Addiction is a very isolating thing. It makes you totally stuck in whatever ways you are, and to the point where what you're doing is actually killing you, and you think that's survival. So when we and fathers have dealt with people who are having addiction issues, the first thing is you got to stop doing what you're doing and actually be somewhat baseline to
Put
even
down
work
the
with
shovel.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that we can even have a conversation with you.
The priests have to say, stop doing that.
Yeah, stop
a
it.
lot. That's
yeah.
like 90% what we do. Don't do that.
My first day of grad school, they showed a skit from MTV or Mad TV. It was called "Stop It," where they're telling them, I have this fear of being buried alive. It was like, okay, well, write this down. Stop it, or I'll bury you alive, or something like that. So, like, just saying "stop it" isn't gonna work, right? You have to actually do something about it. And so, a lot of the times with addiction, we're gonna get them at least to their nutrition,
Right.
eating, healthy, sleeping. This is going to do a lot more than just talking about anything is going to do. So just like, in the spiritual life, with confession, it's an interesting point. I'm sure it's going to be a good episode later down the line, but there's a lot of approaches to confession. And there are many approaches where if you're the priest, you're not saying anything. You're the witness. You purely are listening to what the person is saying and then give absolution. I've seen this a lot in Russia, where there's just a lot of people. You're not going to be giving them a tailored session every time. You're, hopefully hearing this kind of almost like a laundry list of sins, but with intention. This person has come to this knowledge of what they need to work on, and they're kind of witnessing with the priest, and the priest is there to give the absolution. However, there's different approaches.
Very often the priest is hearing what's not said also and thinking there's something missing here. And so a good priest Father knows, will help the person understand what is a sin and are you doing this? Is this happening? Well, that's something to bring to confession and education.
There is in circumstances where you have to hear 40 confessions in 45 minutes. There is obviously a positive spiritual effect, but I'm thinking that's probably not the best use of that sacrament. I think I think having a spiritual father you can actually talk to for more than a couple minutes a week is probably an important thing, and I think we can possibly say that where the church has failed somewhat is the failure to really have. We had an elder visit us in New York, Elder Moses, who was a disciple of Elder St. Paisius of the Holy Mountain. And he wrote a book called Athonite Flowers, a very good book. But we asked him, what's the problem in America? Why is America spiritually in Orthodoxy so weak? He says, there's not enough elders. There's not enough spiritual fathers. And he said, there's not enough spiritual fathers who are versed in the Neptic fathers and are teaching that. Because one of the things that's a serious problem, it's sort of going away now. When I converted to Orthodoxy 30-some-odd years ago, books like the Philokalia and the writings of the Holy Fathers were considered verboten. You don't read them. That's for monks. I was told in my first confession, don't read the Philokalia. I never brought up reading the Philokalia. I had already read it as an Anglican. But it was so ingrained in that generation of priests that they wanted to remove any of this notion of mysticism and asceticism, and I think we're living with the consequences of that.
Why do you think that was? Why do you think that's the case?
I think it was
this immediate projection of the fears that you don't even know you have yet.
Why do you think they did that?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't want people. This is coming from my background as a Protestant. When I started reading the Fathers, people that weren't familiar with it don't want you engaging with material that they're not familiar with.
Well, that's part of it.
That makes that hard.
I think with the Philokalia specifically is if you tell people to read the Philokalia and they read it, they're going to go, that guy's not so great. So, it makes us look like really bad because we're, most of us.
That's how I feel when I read it.
Right.
I feel really bad.
But so I think that's why clergy in those circumstances were basically, they just wanted to deal with, what they learned in seminary. And the fact that we're not just trying to keep people in a stable circumstance, we want them to become, saints, and we want them to exceed us in their sanctity. So I think it was that. I think maybe it was just fear that they might learn things they didn't know. And that particular priest, it was very clear he had never touched the book.
Father Nathan, it's worth reminding people that the church is free, right? You don't have to necessarily, if you need to talk to somebody, you can go to the church and, seek out a priest to talk to. Is this, would you advise this for people out there? I mean, it seems that people, unfortunately today, that if something's free, it's worth what you paid for it, which is really, really unfortunate because, as the song says, the best things in life are free, right?
Right. The church is free, and people should absolutely take advantage of it. The grace of God is not for sale. And so, yes, come to confession, come to the sacraments. Freely you have received, freely give. It feels like we've talked a lot about therapy. And the fact is the term is a very, very broad term. There are all different kinds of therapy: occupational therapy, physical therapy, psychotherapy. So therapy means treatment. And the priest is, of course, a practitioner of therapy. He's treating the soul if he's in confession, if he's doing confession right.
Or even when he's preaching, even when he's doing coffee hour, he should constantly be therapizing his community.
Absolutely. And so, is it the therapist who needs more orthodoxy, or is it the priest who needs more background in therapy, in the proper sense of the word? Both, but it sounds like the panel is leaning towards a return to the traditional role of the priest as therapist, not in the modern sense of the word, my therapist said such and such, but in the sense of the doctor of the soul.
In my experience.
I probably shouldn't have done that. But the general practitioner of the
St.
spiritual
John Chrysostom
hospital.
says the church is a hospital for sinners, right?
So should the priest perhaps in seminary, maybe Father Deacon can speak to this, should the priests in seminary be receiving a little bit more practical education in the basics of good, solid, orthodox grounded therapy?
Yeah, 100%. And I'm glad to say that in Jordanville, it's being done, and the practitioner there is really big on nutrition.
That's good.
Nutrition solving a lot of these
I know her.
mental.
She sang in the choir I directed. Yeah, she's great.
And there are many other practitioners who happen to be Orthodox that also agree with this whole nutrition aspect as a really important thing. But I want to return to that idea of people coming to church and healing themselves that way, and why that's the case. A lot of times therapy is this one-on-one thing, and so these are it's a limited data set, if you will. You can go to group therapy.
Sure.
That's pretty interesting. So it can be a really interesting experience. But why does it start to help people is because there's the beginnings of this idea of community. And the church is literally that.
That's what church means. Ecclesia,
so
yeah.
When people are isolated or addicted to something, they're not connected to themselves, their religion, their thoughts, whatever, to anything. And suddenly they get better when they go to church. And they're like, okay, therapy doesn't work, the church works. Like, well, you're doing it. You're connecting with people. Maybe you sing in the choir. You know, there's music therapists out there that try to heal people through music. We understand, anyone who's been in a choir can know that there's this healing power of music, especially when you're doing it with other people. There are roles where you feel you are able to do things, right? There's a lot of criticism that there's no woman clergy and that women are left out completely in church, and it's true, there is no female clergy. However, there are functioning roles that are not official positions that anybody can hold.
Right.
And one of the best things is being a Christian. It's a good position to be in
Patriarch
church.
Pavel said that's the highest. He said the highest vocation is not patriarch, it's not bishop, it's not priest, it's Christian. And if we remember that, that's open to everybody. And we theoretically serve that. They don't serve us, we serve them.
There is the role of senior sister. Most men are not accepted for the job.
No, and critical to the functions of the church, let me say. Yeah. Fathers, I want to touch on a subject that I wanted to touch on the last class, but we didn't get to. All of us have experienced the weaponization of language. There is, in sales specifically, and in life coaching and even in therapy, there's something called neuro-linguistic programming. Mm-hmm. And this comes,
cool.
Right? So I'm actually trained in this, unfortunately.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I did a whole Tony Robbins class and I learned it.
Uh-oh.
True story. Anyway, essentially this comes from the study of psychology. We've learned what triggers people. We've learned how to essentially influence people through the use of language. Father Deacon, let me start with you. What has been your experience with like neurolinguistic programming and how it has affected society? We see it in our advertisements. We see it with people that want to be your guru. How has the language itself been weaponized?
So, I was qualified that I am no longer a practicing therapist. I'm currently working in sales.
Right.
And I see
Went
much...
to the dark side, or
Right.
the light side, depending on how you think.
Or he
of it.
took his skills and decided to prosper.
Depends what your goals are. Maybe you have financial goals. But there's this, no doubt, language can be manipulated.
Yes.
And, I mentioned...
Can it?
Indeed.
Should it?
It probably shouldn't.
I'm
But it
hearing
will-
you right
it will
now.
happen.
NLP style, right?
And if you ever heard of like the Sandler methodology, you start off with trying to disarm the person,
Right.
and kind of get out of that initial flight reaction. You're trying to have them say the opposite of what you want, right? So instead of saying, "Is it a good time?" "Is it a bad time?" You're
Right.
trying to have the same say no. The same thing can
We're
be
trying to get him to say yes 3 times right away. Like, would you agree that you're out of shape? Yes. Would you agree that you need, these are things that, unfortunately, a lot of people are very unaware that it's being done to them.
Yeah,
Right?
and English is a very good language for all this to occur. This little sandbox of political theory, especially when different words can mean different things to different people.
Right.
And in therapy, it's the same thing, because you can say that this is good or this is bad, and that can become your truth. Even some things that might not be very good, but depending on the therapist you're going to, that they might help you qualify this. So, I'll take a step back and say that there is points of this neurolinguistic programming that priests use, and therapists use, and salesmen use, and it comes in the form of what you're trying to achieve with your question,
Right.
And so, for a lot of the times, we're trying to achieve some sort of information, and we can do that by doing a closed-ended question. Is it this or that? Do you feel like this or that?
Or isn't this
Right.
or that, right?
Right, and maybe a good salesman will tell you, or a good therapist will tell you, that an open-ended question will probably give you more information than a closed-ended question. So, how are you feeling is a better question than what are you feeling, good or bad.
Right.
The same thing can be said, if you're having a confession, perhaps that there is a sense of, okay, well, I need to learn something more, as Father pointed out, and maybe there's a good anecdote of, a man complaining about his wife along, and then the priest gives absolution to the wife, and now says, okay, now give me your confession.
Yes.
We can achieve different things with language, and no doubt language has been weaponized, but so has the church. The church has also been weaponized. And for many people, they've even attempted to weaponize Christ.
Right.
Not working too well. And you can see that those who are trying to push it are getting some pushback.
That's a Christian racist dog whistle, Father Deacon.
Call it like I see it.
Right? It's funny because we talk about the weaponization of language, and this term dog whistle comes up. It's really kind of like the last 15 years, but if you think about a dog whistle, it's not something that you can naturally hear, but the dogs can hear it, right? So there are words that are said that are meant to trigger other things, but accusing somebody of, their language of being a dog whistle itself is an attempt to discredit or weaponize, their entire language. Father Maximus, we've talked a lot about the use of language in theology, and it seems to be that language has always kind of been tailored to make people understand things. Obviously, that's what language is for. The use of the term word or logos has had a lot of repercussions, throughout history. What's your opinion on the importance of language and the modern weaponization of language?
Obviously language is very, very important, and using the correct language and explaining things, particularly when we talk about theology or philosophy, there's a right word. We can create new words as needed. I'm not necessarily sure that the weaponization of language is new. I think we don't have to look, when we say new, what do we mean? We could say 100 years, 200 years. This process is, we can even say, going back in the Middle Ages, the state would use words in particular ways. That's how they.
I mean, I just thought of it, even going back to the Garden of Eden.
The
exactly. Devils, you weaponizing the language. Surely you won't. Did God say that? Surely you won't die.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So there are the devil's called the father of lies, and there's many clever ways of lying. And from what you say, this NLP might be one of those, but there's many ways of saying the truth as well. So, there's a theory, it's like, what is the intention of the person using this technology, whatever you want to call it? Is it, as Father says, it's used in therapy to bring people to an awareness of something? Well, then, no problem. Are you using it to try to sell somebody something they don't need for your own purposes? Well, then that's bad. So I think language itself can be weaponized, but also I think the word weaponized is weaponized.
Yeah.
Because anything we don't like, we can say is weaponized. That means you're using language in a way I don't like.
Even the word triggered. What is a trigger?
It means
it's firing off a weapon.
And this
right?
is why I think Orthodox Christians, we have to man up or woman up.
I like that.
We have to, because the notion is we begin playing this game of who's hurt more, right? And if people want to use language in whatever way they want, let them do it. We have the truth, and I think that's the important thing. Is all of this is clothing. It says in Scripture, "You shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free."
Amen.
So that I think that's important. So let them weaponize it. That's fine. Let them say we're dog whistling, and we just have to come up with better answers and better communication.
Fathers, I want to go to questions in the chat and live questions as well. I want to read this passage from Isaiah, and then Father Nathan, if you would actually take us out with the gospel passage from Matthew, there on the back, Matthew 6. Isaiah 26, 3-4, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee. Trust ye in the Lord forever, for in the Lord Jehovah is everlasting strength." Amen.
The evangelist Matthew says that, or rather Jesus Christ says in the Gospel of Matthew, "No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon." Now, mammon was the god of wealth and money.
Sure.
"Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what you shall eat, or what ye shall drink, nor yet for your body, what ye shall put on. Is not the life more than meat, and the body more than raiment? Behold the fowls of the air, for they sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns. Yet your heavenly Father feedeth them. Are ye not much better than they? Which of you by taking thought can add 1 cubit unto his stature?" A cubit being this distance.
Right.
Yeah. "And why take ye thought for raiment? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say unto you, that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Wherefore, if God so clothe the grass of the field, which today is, and tomorrow is cast into the oven, shall he not much more clothe you, O ye of little faith? Therefore take no thought, saying, What shall we eat? Or what shall we drink? Or wherewithal shall we be clothed? For after all these things do the Gentiles seek. For your heavenly Father knoweth that ye have need of these things. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Take therefore no thought for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof."
Amen. If our live audience has questions, raise your hand. I'm going to try and work through some of these chats. I've gotten a couple text messages from family members. Amen, brothers. Alleluia. You guys are killing it tonight. The truth. So that's the best chat I could possibly get from my family. Thank you very much. Let's see. Thank you, George.
We need to do say something controversial.
Yeah, go ahead.
Carl Jung was a wizard.
A wizard.
I think he was.
And we anathematize him. Okay.
Druid.
What about someone who is going to therapy not for trauma or revealing your trauma, but rather to organize your life? We need you to make your bed. I want you to make your bed. Wake up and make your bed.
If it
Right.
works.
Yeah, it depends what you mean by organize. If you might have like ADHD and you might not be able to organize things very well.
Is
Not
that
sure.
therapy or counseling, or even what's the word when somebody's an expert? Consulting. A consultant on organizing your life. That's more like that than therapy, right?
Yeah, person might be intending maybe mentorship. Maybe they need a mentor to tell them how to
Right.
organize their life.
I would
what
say a
things are
consultant
important.
gets paid on the work that they do, like their outcome, though. That's the difference between consultant
Yeah.
and therapy or counselor,
Yeah.
right? You're paying a therapist, you're paying a counselor for their time, you're paying a consultant for what they can do for you, right? So there's an outcome involved there. Maybe that should
Yeah.
be with
A good
counseling
thing
and
to
therapy,
seek.
too.
A good thing to seek.
Let's see. Do we overemphasize trauma in life, in the modern life, or has that always been a thing that people did? Focusing on the past, focusing on trauma, focusing on our past sins.
But it's not new. It's more prevalent in that there's so many ways to communicate it now. You know, when I get a message, I have to say which platform am I getting the message on. I don't think necessarily people are whining more than they used to, but there's certainly more outlets and platforms for it because, people in previous times, for the most part, suffered horrible, difficult trauma. But I think, war and all these kinds of things, and I think probably the solution in many cases was the church for people who had access or booze for people who didn't. I don't think
We all have our form of therapy.
Yeah, I think generation prior to mine, a lot of people could have used some kind of like organized sort of like explanation, but there was just like they would drink.
So trauma is perhaps more egocentric, more self-centered now, where if
It's more
before
spoken about, I think.
some people recognize the traumas,
Right.
but instead of hyperfixating on them, they would admit this is what it was, this is what happened, and deal with it.
Walk it off.
Yes,
Just walk
a
it
lot
off.
more
Just take a
walking
lap.
off.
A lot more walking off, which I don't necessarily know was better.
Actually, is a pretty
cheaper.
good. It's a pretty good actual advice for trauma specifically. Walking allows you
Yeah.
to activate both parts of your brain, bipedal, and you are able to actually process difficult events
makes
by
sense.
literally walking it off.
So walking
Yeah.
it off
Interesting.
does work.
Yeah, it does.
Interesting.
A lot of movement does help. Doing
Yeah.
things that require you to use both parts of your brain.
Vigorous
Sitting-
exercise really, really helps.
That's
it's amazing.
One of the issues that depression, clinical depression, is oversleeping, because that's the worst place to be in when you're trying to deal with something, because then all of those logismoi, or those ideas or thoughts, they become as real as anything else when you're
Right.
asleep or when you're so getting up and doing things and praying or doing whatever is half the battle.
A lot of people struggle to find meaning in life, and they kind of go to wherever they're able to get it. There's a pretty good book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Very good book, yes.
And he's kind of the creator of logotherapy. So this idea that there's the logos, since he's a Frankl, he's not really giving you exactly which God to talk to,
Right.
but there is this idea that there is meaning. Existentialist therapies like Yalom voice the very same questions of why that Dostoevsky voices in his writings. They're trying to give some explanation of why things are happening, this meaning. But when we have the church, we have Christ, we're able to pair these things and not keep them in isolation to whatever it is that you believe or your therapist believes.
Would Father Maximus ever go to therapy?
Didn't Father say a lot of it is court ordered?
Maybe couples therapy. I don't
Yeah,
think he'll go to
couples
that.
therapy,
I don't think he'll be
Who
going.
asked that question?
I don't know.
Just random.
George
No.
sent me the text. I can go through.
I think the solution for problems is I'm in therapy, and it's called orthodoxy, and it's called Orthodox monasticism. So insofar as I'm able to do my prayers, and you go talk to somebody, you can complain about things, but I have to do the work. They can say, oh, do this and do that. I don't necessarily think. I think for most people who are not like totally mentally ill, I think it's just the human act of doing things.
For Father Nathan, super chat. Thank you, Russell Bell 616. I've been trying out the Jesus prayer advice that you gave last class, Father Maximus. It's been helping. Does Father Nathan have any advice about noetic prayer?
I don't think so, really. Pray it every chance you get, all the time. If you're not doing something else, let your default setting be pray the Jesus prayer. Pray it to the beat of your heart. Learn to hear your heartbeat, and let that be your default. Anytime that you're that your thoughts are not occupied with something else that distracts you from it.
I will admit two things. One of the obediences that Father Maximus gave me is to, do more of the Jesus prayer, more every time I'm angry, every time. That has been my therapy, and that has helped me greatly.
Because it's not just a therapy in the formal sense. It's invoking the name of Christ,
right,
which has mystical power.
This is important too, because in transcendental meditation, which I dabbled in many years ago, there is this belief that don't have thoughts, but you have like a mantra, right? But you mentioned the last class we did on this, Father, that the mantra can't save you. Only Christ can save you, right? So let Christ be your mantra. I would also mention in the third or the fourth volume of the Philokalia, St. Simeon, the New Theologian, is talking about the Jesus prayer, and he says that there's 3 steps to really achieving it. The first one is purifying yourself of the passions. So if you really want to achieve noetic prayer, purification from the passions is the first step. That's according to St. Simeon, the New Theologian. What is healing in your opinions? Like, what does healing mean?
Therapia means healing. That's ultimately what it means. Healing is being in a state of peace, where your nous is to the point where you're able to see God in creation, and you have a relationship with the Lord where your faith is manifest. Short of that, I guess there's other things. But if we want to examine, if we were to take some of the great saints of the Christian tradition and send them to a therapist, they'd be locked up. Not just the fools for Christ. Some of the way the Desert Fathers choose to live makes no sense from a worldly perspective.
Right. So it's a paradigm shift.
It's a paradigm shift. It's because the first thing is, what are you trying to do? I think you hit it exactly. We have to define what health is before we can understand the system by which we achieve it. And if the church defines it as being divinized through asceticism and through prayer and through the Eucharist, that's a very different set of circumstances than if you're just trying to not feel lousy so you can hold down some job and do whatever.
Yeah. People want to know when the AI debate is going to happen. We need to formalize what the actual...
Yeah, I think we have to... There's several things going on with the AI debate. It's such a big subject.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a circumstance of being for or against, because I think certainly no one can say it's something that is an unalloyed good. Right. That everyone can say, no, George talks about the fact that somebody who says AI is my God. Obviously that's a problem. But again, I think we have to maybe lay down the parameters a little bit.
Yeah. Like, should Orthodox Christians be suspect of AI, or how should we need to get the topic exact.
Because I think you could stop it at suspect. Should Orthodox Christians be suspect period of pretty much everything, but that's a different class.
Russell follows up with another super chat. Should his eyes be open or closed during prayer? The fathers actually have differing opinions on this.
Again, that's something I think you talk to your spiritual father. I don't think there's any right way. I do it. Sometimes I walk around and I'll say the Jesus prayer, and obviously I don't want to fall into a ditch or something, so I keep my eyes open. But
I've done it where I've like walked to the store, and my eyes start closing. I'm like, no, this is not smart. I've also done it when I'm like trying to pray intensely with like a blindfold, like one of those sleeping things, so that you don't have anything getting in your way. I think it depends on how you're doing it and what your spiritual father says.
If my eyes are closed, I go to sleep. So
Yeah.
my eyes are usually open. The fathers do say, do not try to conjure up images while you're
Correct,
praying.
yeah. Which is exactly the opposite of what Jung is saying, by the way. That's worth repeating.
Exactly opposite. Not just slightly opposite, exactly opposite.
My Eden says, my therapist is actually an Orthodox priest. He has a PhD in counseling. Is it common for priests to work as psychologists? And do you think it might be problematic?
I think it's really hard to do because of the amount of schooling you have to do to
Right.
not only have a theological degree, but also to get a PhD and be in academia for so long. Time is a resource. So every time that a priest is ministering to someone else is not getting that time. I applaud whoever is able to do both of these roles. I don't think it's a problem. I think it's great that they have a PhD in counseling and they're a priest. I'm sure they're really busy. I'm sure they really do not have a lot of time, but I'm sure they have great boundaries with people. I think, as we said before, we should probably have more, training for existing Orthodox priests, just about mental health in general. But I don't think it's bad that your priest is also.
I would just say that, and I've met some PhDs and who are priests and whatever. Who are you? You got to remember who you're working for, all the time, because some of them I've met them where they get very confused, and it's more sort of psychologizing Christianity than Christianizing psychology. So that
Who do you work for?
Yeah, who do you work for?
Ideally, you should be a priest. That is your job. That
That's
is the canonically what you're supposed to do. And it's unfortunate that we live in a society where we have to have secular employment in order to sustain, if we have families, our families, and ourselves, and that we can't just all be priests. I'm sure every priest wants to just be the priest, but with the many hats that they wear,
Which, by the way, is a big problem. It should not be that way.
Unless the live audience has questions, Anna's going to have our last question. Then, fathers, if you could take us out with prayer. Thank you so much for the class. If you haven't done so, like, subscribe, share the stream. We're working with new software, microphones, and everything. So if there was technical glitches, please forgive us. We're going to get honed in. There's going to be a lot more content coming. All glory to God. Anna asks, what are your thoughts on the book God, Where is the Wound by M. Silawana? Healing by seeing your sin in every circumstance that happened to a person as a path to healing. What are your thoughts? I'm not familiar with it.
I'm not either, but my wife is enthusiastic about it. So
Well, so it must be good.
Yeah, I think there's this, whatever has happened to you, it's this radical acceptance that, this has happened to you, and what meaning you carve out of it can either be to your benefit or to your destruction. That happens a lot in confession and in therapy.
I think finding meaning is important, because you can't just say be an Orthodox Christian. Okay, well, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? And I think one of the attractions that the Jungian system gives people is it delineates the process, right? You identify your the complexes and all these various other things, and part of the failure that we have in Orthodoxy is we have a process too. We have a very definite process. It's in the Neptic Fathers, but we are not talking about it. We're not preaching it, and so people are going other places because we're not doing our job. I think we just need to do our job in a real way.
Isn't the meaning of life to become like Christ?
Yes, but Christ is also God, right? So it's a different circumstance. I want to become like Christ, but I got to figure out how to do it in Coconut Creek,
Right.
or on Lions Road. That's a different thing, because we can do. St. Maximus tells us there's an infinite number of goods we can do. Should we right now be like flying to Africa and preaching to the natives, or should we be doing a soup kitchen, or should we be doing this? So there's a lot of options, and then trying to find out. And I think in this world, I know it's like there's so many good things to do. Once you stop doing evil things, then you have to figure out what good things should I do.
So stop doing evil things.
First, stop doing evil things,
Okay.
because that takes up a lot of time. And then once you stop doing evil things, then the Word will open up. What good things what should you do? But my feeling is God will make it abundantly clear what you need. Ask God, and He'll make it clear what you need to do.
Fathers, thank you so much. Thank you to our live audience. Thank you to everyone watching. Fathers, if you would take us out in prayer, it would be much appreciated.
Can you escape through this one? Narrow is the way.
It is truly need to bless you that they are taught. Blessed and most blameless and Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, and beyond compare more glorious than the seraphim, who without corruption gave us birth to God the Word. The very Theotokos thee do we magnify. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, will now and ever, into the ages of ages. Amen. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Father, bless.
His grace and love for mankind, always now and ever, and unto the ages of ages.
Amen.